New cars, new regs, and a new F1 season. This week I'm chatting all about the 2026 Formula 1 season. So get ready because you've been summoned to the Steward's office. Hello everyone and welcome back to the Steward's office. I'm Syra and this week we are kicking off season 4 of this podcast. Yep, I also can't believe I've been doing this for a full 3 seasons. Going into a 4th now, it feels insane to me, but I'm so glad to be doing this and I'm so glad to be back. I hope you guys had a really good and restful winter break, whether you were celebrating Christmas or not, whatever you were doing. I hope you enjoyed it. But that piece is going to be interrupted because Formula 1 is pretty much back. It's right around the corner. Right now we're in the middle of a lot of livery reveals, a lot of rumours going around about these cars, because 2026 is a pretty huge year for all the teams and the drivers, and that's simply because we have a huge regulation change going on right now. It is massive. So I thought I'd spend this episode chatting about what is going on with those regulation changes and what I'm looking out for. There's just a lot going on. So let's kick off with chat about the regulations. And the last time we had a regulation change was in 2022. And that was pretty significant, to be fair, because we did have the introduction of ground effect come into the cars. And yeah, it suited some teams, didn't suit others, suited some drivers and didn't suit others. But this year, not only is the aero of the car, the aerodynamics of the car changing, we're also getting a huge change in the engine. And we haven't seen such a huge change in the engines since 2014. It's been over 10 years. So it's a really significant change and a really important change for all the teams to get right and make sure that they're on top of it. A quick look at those 2022 regulations, though. It really wasn't long since we've had that change, and were they working? Not necessarily. The whole point the 2022 regulations came in was because the FIA and F1 wanted to have closer racing. They wanted less DTS so the cars could follow closer to each other, more overtaking, more on-track action. Did that happen? Absolutely not. I don't think we really had consistent close racing and consistent cars following each other in the races. And was that down to some teams really nailing the regulations and some not? Yeah, definitely. But overall, I wouldn't necessarily say that these set of regulations that we've just left were a success, if I'm honest with you. And I think a lot of the drivers and teams and fans in general would agree it didn't really pan out the way the FIA and F1 wanted it to. But that is the past. We've left that all behind. We're coming into a new era of Formula 1, and what is going on with them? What are we expecting from the cars? Well, the cars should be narrower and lighter. So compared to the 2022 regulation cars, they should be less cumbersome for the drivers to get around track. It shouldn't feel as sluggish, and I say it shouldn't because it still could, and the whole point in it being lighter does come with a caveat. Now, the FIA have reduced the minimum weight limit, so the absolute minimum the cars can be, that has been brought down. However, just because the cars can't be lighter than that minimum doesn't mean that they won't end up heavier. And we saw a lot when the last set of regulations came in. That weight limit is something that the teams really struggle with. And rumours are at the moment that a lot of the teams are also still struggling to get to that minimum weight limit. I think I read a rumour that one of the teams is about 15 kilograms over, which is a hefty amount for an F1 car to be over by. So, you know, theoretically, it should be better. Narrower cars that are lighter should really lend itself to better racing, but it does depend on the weight side what the teams are able to do. What the FIA have said though, and they announced this middle of 2025 I think, is that there's no leeway on that minimum weight limit. What's happened before is when the teams haven't been able to reach that lower weight limit, the FIA have pushed the weight limit up a little bit so it's fair on all of the teams and it's a more even playing field. What the FIA did say with these set of regulations is that they won't be doing that. That minimum weight limit is fixed and they expect the teams to reach it because they're like, look, your engineers and your mechanics and everything are all good enough to find a way to make this lighter, so you're going to have to find a way to do it, which I do think is fair. So that's just the overview, right? If we were just looking at it from a really simple point of view, the cars should be narrower and they should be lighter. But let's have a chat about that all important engine. Like I said, it's not been changed since 2014, and this is a huge change for Formula One. So the main thing to know is that these engines are going to be relying more on electrical energy than ever before. There is now a 50-50 split. 50% of the car is going to be powered by electrical energy. That is something new that the teams and the drivers are going to have to figure out. The MGUH, which was super tricky to sort of engineer and fix and sort out, that is completely gone now. There's no MGUH in the engine anymore. What the FIA is hoping for with that is that there should now be less difference between the very best engine and the very worst engine, so that differential should be a lot smaller and make more teams competitive. We are also going to see advanced sustainable fuels used in Formula One for the first time, which basically means that it's going to be 100% sustainable fuel. Now F2 and F3 have been trialling this last year, didn't seem to have any issues, and Formula One have been moving towards more sustainable fuel, so the percentage of sustainable fuel has been going up. This is the first year it's completely sustainable, which is another reason why the engines had to change to be able to deal with the fact that that fuel is completely sustainable, because it does react and behave in a slightly different way. Now the FA have made those changes with two main reasons in mind. Now the first one, super obvious, they want it to be sustainable. Their main aim with Formula One for the past couple of years is to become a more sustainable sport. Formula One have their whole net zero goal that they're trying to reach. The FIA itself want the sport to be more eco-friendly. They're traveling around the world a lot. It's literal race cars, guys. It's going to let off a lot of emissions. So they're trying to find ways to be more eco-friendly. So the hope is with the introduction of sustainable fuels and also having that electrical energy now to rely on more, that the sport does become a little bit more sustainable. Now, the second thing that the FIA really wanted was to attract more engine suppliers and teams to the grid. Now, there are some manufacturers who didn't necessarily want to join F1, even though they thought it was a great opportunity. They didn't want to join it because it wasn't super sustainable, and part of their company charter might have been that they want to be as eco-friendly and as green as possible. So joining a sport like Formula One, where emission rates are high and you're traveling around the world and it doesn't seem like they're doing much to be sustainable, isn't going to look great when you go to your board members or your customers and say, hey, look, we're joining Formula One, but we still are eco-friendly. So that was part of the reason. And it kind of has done its job, like we'll discuss later, because it has actually brought in some new engine suppliers. But let's be honest, right? The engine is a super complex part of the Formula One car. Obviously really important, but there's a lot of intricacies that go into a Formula One engine. What makes it work well and smooth and all the rest of it. So more than likely in 2026, we are going to end up seeing a couple of reliability issues when it comes to these engines, because the teams are going to be working out what works well, what doesn't, what is going to break the engine, what is going to make it run super smooth. There's going to be a lot that they're going to have to iron out when they're on track, because they weren't able to predict it happen. They weren't able to, make those models that could tell them XYZ will happen with this engine if you do this. It might just be the engine giving up. It might be a lot of overheating issues with the engine and things like that. We will have to wait and see. But yeah, I would expect some reliability issues. The most exciting part of these entire regulations for me is the fact that ground effect has finally gone. Thank goodness. Ground effect has left Formula One again after an unsuccessful run in the past couple of years. I'm not surprised. That has gone, which means, a lot of the aerodynamics is changing on the cars again. We're not going to get the super complex Venturi tunnels on the bottom of the floors again. And the loss of ground effect should mean that it's going to suit a lot more driving styles again for all of the drivers across the grid, because so many of them struggled with the ground effect cars. But it should also lend itself to a wider sort of opening when it comes to their setups. I think a lot of teams got boxed into a very small setup window during the ground effect era. Losing it should mean it widens it again and therefore really suit a lot more drivers. And hopefully, fingers crossed, the lack of ground effect should also mean less porpoising, the cars sort of bottoming out onto the track, the sparks that we saw, and of the back pain that the drivers tended to get from that. So I can't lie, quite glad that is gone. DRS has also left. That's another thing that's gone from these regulations, and that one, it still doesn't feel real almost to me, because DRS has been a really big part in Formula 1 over the last couple of years, and it was brought in so that there was more overtaking that could happen on track. But what the FIA and F1 have done is find a couple of other things to introduce in its place, and there are 3 things that I think really stand out as trying to replace DRS and encourage more overtaking, all of which I'm super interested in. So let's have a chat about them. So first up, we have overtake mode. Now that is going to give the drivers extra power, and it kind of works similarly to DRS. They do need to be within a second of the car ahead of them to use it, and they have to be within that second at certain detection points. So similar to DRS in that sense, but the rear wing doesn't move. It's just an extra power boost for them. And they can use it all in one go if they want, or they can use it in bursts throughout the lap. So it's completely up to them strategically how they want to use it. So I think that's pretty cool. That one I'm really excited about. There's also active aero. This means that the front and rear wing can move and reduce the amount of drag that the car is facing. For this one, you do need to be on certain straights on the track for it to work. However, doesn't matter how far you are from the car ahead of you. Every single car on track will be able to use it as long as they're in that certain straight on the track. You're allowed to use your active aero and get a little bit more speed from that reduction in drag. There is also boost mode, which is really similar to the use of KERS in like 2009 to 2013, I think it was. That is also known as harvesting sometimes, and that's going to be when they can use extra energy that they made from braking. So a good couple of different things that the drivers are going to have at their disposal to use to try and overtake and make those moves and gain time on their opponents. I am really curious and super excited to see all of this work in the first race of the season. And I know we'll see bits of it working in testing in Bahrain, but I'm really curious to see how it works in wheel-to-wheel racing when we actually get the cars fighting against each other. Do I think there'll be issues? Absolutely, there always are. And do I think specifically with active aero, teams are going to find the grey area and, try and exploit it as much as they can, and we'll have other teams complaining? Of course, it's Formula 1. That's what happens. But I'm really excited. I can't lie. I'm genuinely quite excited to see how this works. The FIA, along with all of these regulations, have, of course, tried to improve safety for all of the drivers. So there are things like enhanced survival cell testing, just to make sure that if the drivers are to crash, they're as safe as possible in their cell. And also the roll hoop has been strengthened. I'm all for the FIA finding better ways to protect the drivers and make sure that they're as safe as possible while they're in the car, and they're always trying to do things to improve that safety. But that's like a really brief overview of the regulations. Of course, there are more intricacies and things that go into the regulations, but I think those are some of the really standout important bits, I think especially for fans to know about. It does give the drivers a lot more, I would say power, but it's just a lot more at their disposal to use when they're in the car, right? They're in control of a little bit more, which hopefully should lead to more chances when it comes to overtaking. Theoretically, it should. Practically, we'll see what happens when we get on track. But what it is going to mean is, one, the drivers having to learn a lot more different modes and buttons and things to press. They will have that information from their race engineers as well. But it's about using those things like active aero and boost and overtake mode, using them in a way that is going to allow them to get the perfect lap. Like, how do they optimize all 3 of those things to get the quickest lap possible when they go into qualifying, and then get the perfect overtake in when it comes to the race without losing any time? That is going to be a really big learning curve for the drivers to figure out, because none of them are going to be used to any of these. So it's going to be so interesting to see which drivers and which teams get a handle on it really quickly and can utilize it super well, and which drivers and teams are going to struggle finding the best way to use it. But look, as much as I'm hoping there's better racing, of course, I'm just expecting a lot of trial and error. I mean, the shakedown in Barcelona, that testing, which is completely closed off to the public and the media, part of that is so that, any reliability issues and things like that can be ironed out without the eyes of the media on them and watching their every move and speculating. But even with that, and even going to Bahrain testing, I am still expecting a lot of learnings to happen throughout the season, and a lot of upgrades and changes to those cars. So I'm super curious. New regulations, I think, are so exciting because every team will have a different interpretation of them. I mean, we've already heard rumors that Mercedes have found a grey area with the engine that could give them extra horsepower. I think it was like 15 horsepower, like that gain on their competitors. That is just a rumor, but once again, there will be teams that will find grey areas in the aero regs and the engine regs. So it's all to play for, and I can't wait to see which teams have really managed to nail this and which teams have fallen behind a bit. Let's have a little bit of a chat though, what else is going on away from these regulations, the sort of things that I'm looking out for this season. We have 2 brand new teams on the grid, which is super exciting. So we have Audi and we have Cadillac. Now Audi have taken over the Sauber outfit, so they're not brand new in terms of they've come out of absolutely nowhere. They are taking over an old team, but they are coming in with their own engine, and that's something that Sauber didn't do. Sauber always leased the Ferrari engine, so I'm very curious how that is going to go. Now for Audi, they do have Nico Hülkenberg, who's a very experienced driver, and Gabriel Bortoleto, who has proven himself as an extremely quick driver. But that's going to be super interesting to see, and they were a team that I think were really attracted by these new set of engine regulations to join F1. We also then have Cadillac coming in, and they are the brand new 11th team on the grid. Now they are going to be making their own engine. They have said they will. However, not yet. For now, they're going to be using the Ferrari engine. They said they just need some more time to get their own engine up and running, build it, and get everything sorted. So they'll be using the Ferrari engine. But yeah, we have 11 teams on the grid now, which is crazy to think. I mean, we're going to have the drivers complain so much more about traffic. I can't wait to hear those radios. You know, we love them. But we do have Valtteri Bottas and Sergio Perez back on the grid, because Cadillac have got them as their drivers, which is going to be really interesting, because these are 2 drivers who have played second fiddle in a team a lot of the time. I mean, Valtteri Bottas was Lewis Hamilton's teammate in Mercedes for that huge dominant period that Mercedes had. And for Sergio Perez, it was the same with Max and Red Bull. He was the second driver behind Max Verstappen while Red Bull had their huge dominant era. So it's going to be so interesting to see how these 2 drivers now do with this team, and I'm really curious what happens in that teammate head-to-head, but it's great to have them both back on the grid. Cadillac are coming in as an American team. I mean, I think F1 have really wanted to attract an American team, but with Audi and Cadillac, the whole thing that I think everyone involved in F1, whether you're a fan, whether you're in the sport itself, the whole point in having the new teams was just making sure that they didn't end up as a back marker, which I think is kind of what happened with Haas, if we're honest. They ended up being a back marker team and not really competing, and they've been struggling over the past couple of years. There is hope that Cadillac and Audi will not be like that. And look, regardless of the new regs, I would have expected teething problems anyway from 2 new teams, but I have hope that they'll at least be in the middle of a pack. Red Bull have a pretty big change. Ford are coming in kind of as their engine supplier. It's more of a technical relationship. Red Bull are still making their own power unit, but Ford are offering a lot of technical expertise as well. And Laurent Merkis has already said that they will likely start on the back foot, because this is a team that is having to get used to building their own engines. They've never done it before in their history in F1. It is a really big step for a team to make. So I think he's just tampering expectations, which is understandable, but it's going to be really interesting to see Ford partner up with Red Bull and what that brings them. They have announced that they have named their engine the DM01 after Dietrich Mateschitz, their founder, which I think is just such a lovely touch. He obviously passed away, and yeah, I think Red Bull knew that this was such a big dream for him to be able to have his cars powered by their own engine, to now be able to produce that. I think it's a really lovely nod. Another engine that is returning to the grid is Honda, but this time they're going with Aston Martin. Now, Honda did supply Red Bull with their engines for a really long time, left the grid when Red Bull stated that they wanted to build their own powertrains, and Aston Martin opted to leave the Mercedes powered engine for their own engine supplier. Now, Honda aren't supplying to anyone else on this grid. So for all intents and purposes, this is Aston Martin's engine. Okay, they didn't make it, but they're not necessarily a customer team in the sense that another team's engine is being used. Honda is building this engine specifically for Aston Martin. And I think this is a move that Lawrence Stroll has probably wanted to make for a little bit, because you have a bit more freedom when it's your own engine, when it's not a customer engine and gearbox and all the rest of it, and you having to sort of fit your car around what another team has done. This engine means that Aston Martin, their engineers, have a little bit more freedom in what they're doing with their car, and it's that independence from the other teams on the grid. They are their own team completely on their own with Honda. Will it help them fight towards the front of the field? I don't know. We'll wait and see. I think kind of like with Ford now and with Audi, I would expect a couple more issues than some of the other teams, because I know with Honda they have more recently supplied an engine than Ford has, but there's still been that sort of gap. So I don't know. I think Aston in general, there's been a lot of big changes. Adrian Newey coming in as team principal. I am expecting to see a couple of teething problems. I hope in the next couple of years that they do end up as front runners and they are battling for wins and championships. I just don't think 2026 is going to be that year. Enough about the cars though, having a quick chat about our drivers. Isaac Hadjar has officially made the move up to Red Bull for the 2026 season, and I feel nervous just saying that. Now, I am hoping that this goes well for him. I really hope that this is a successful move to him and it helps his career instead of hinders it. However, if we were to look at recent history, it's not looking too good, guys. Let's be honest here. I'm nervous, okay? I think Hadjar's attitude going into the season, though, from the sounds of his interviews and what other people in Red Bull have been saying, is that he just wants to learn. He is not going in there to try and beat Max Verstappen necessarily. He wants to just go and learn from the team, from Max, and hone his racing skills and become a better driver. And I do think that is a really good mindset to go in with, instead of being like, I'm going to beat one of the best drivers on the grid, a 4-time world champion. Yep, obviously it'll be great if he does manage to outqualify Max at times or finish ahead of Max in a race. But I think having that growth mindset of like, nope, I just want to learn is going to be super helpful, especially because he's only in his second year on the grid. I have a little bit more hope because we have Laurent Mekies in that role as team principal right now, and because Helmut Marko has left his advisor role within Red Bull. I hope that there is less pressure. Of course, any seat in Formula 1 will have pressure and he does need to perform well, but I hope it's just not to the extent that we saw other drivers be under pressure from the team. So nervous but excited because he did do really, really well in his rookie year, and I'm hoping that he can get to grips with the car and everything going on in Red Bull and have a good drive. Lewis Hamilton is the other driver that I'm really, really curious about going into this season, because look, first season at Ferrari was bad. I don't think there's another way to say it. Neither driver was happy with the car, I will say that. Like, neither driver was impressed with the car they'd been given. However, Lewis and Fred admitted it took a lot of Lewis getting used to everything in Ferrari, and it took a bit longer than either of them were expecting. So I'm kind of hoping that now that the teething problems almost are out of the way with, that this season might go better for him. He also is having a brand new race engineer. Riccardo Adami has not left Ferrari, he's in a different role. Part of that is being in charge of the Ferrari driver academy, so all their junior drivers, but he's out of his role as race engineer for Lewis. I don't think it's a fix-all, don't get me wrong, right? I'm not saying that Adami being out is going to fix every single problem for Lewis and for Ferrari. However, I do hope that there's better communication and more trust between Lewis and his race engineer now. But yeah, I think he is really hoping for a better season, and Ferrari are definitely going to want that from him. Part of it obviously is going to depend on the car, but yeah, I think the slew of Q1 exits, of no points finishes in the race, those are things he's really going to want to say goodbye to in 2026. And just in general, we've got one rookie joining this season compared to the 3, 4, 5 we had in 2025. So Arvid Lindblad is linking up with Racing Bulls and Liam Lawson. I'm super excited to see him in Formula One. He seems excited to be on the grid, obviously, but yeah, he is a talent that Red Bull has really kept a close eye on over the past couple of years. They've really quickly pulled him through the ranks. They got special suspension when it came to his super license. They are really excited about him as a driver, and I think a lot of people are excited to see what he can do. And I can't lie, I think part of the reason I am also super excited is because he comes from Indian heritage, and whilst I'm not Indian, I am South Asian and Deshi, so it's so nice seeing that little bit of representation on the grid, and he's super proud of it. He is a British driver, but his dad's side of the family are Swedish, his mum's side of the family are Indian, and so he's a driver that seems really proud of his heritage and everything. So I'm really excited just to have that small bit of representation on the grid. It really does make a difference. That is basically my sum up of the 2026 season, like my little overview of it. Wow, yeah, there is just a lot to keep an eye out for. Honestly, there's so much I'm excited to see, so much I'm nervous about, but I genuinely can't wait just to see these cars on track at this point. I cannot wait for testing to kick off and just to see what all the teams have opted to do and how the drivers are feeling about the cars. Oh gosh, it's going to be an interesting season, guys. I am going to have my predictions form up and ready for you guys to fill out so we can do an episode on that. So I will pop that in the show notes or in the description if you're watching on YouTube. But thank you guys so much for listening, and diolch yn fawr. Make sure you follow me on TikTok and Instagram at stewards_office, and I'll see you guys the next time you're summoned to the Steward's office.